The audio recording that Lauren Boebert played sent shockwaves through the Senate chamber. Kamala Harris's own voice emerged from the speakers, detailing how she dismissed cases in exchange for bribes. "The money's in my account, case dismissed tomorrow." This single sentence would end the vice president's political career forever. What happened in the next 120 seconds would expose the largest judicial corruption scandal in American history and prove that Kamala Harris had turned the California justice system into her personal money-making operation, while innocent victims were denied justice. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that's about to destroy everything you thought you knew about our vice president, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. You're about to witness the complete annihilation of a political career built on corruption, bribery, and the betrayal of justice itself. The packed Senate chamber vibrated with tension on this humid August afternoon, the kind of electric atmosphere that precedes a massive thunderstorm. What was supposed to be a routine confirmation hearing for federal judicial appointments was about to become the most devastating political exposure in Senate history. Sitting at the witness table, 37-year-old Congresswoman Lauren Boebert from Colorado had come armed with evidence that would destroy the second-highest office in American government. Her charcoal gray blazer was impeccably tailored, her demeanor calm and professional, but those who knew her recognized the look in her eyes, the same predatory focus of a hunter who had finally cornered the most dangerous prey of her career. Lauren Boebert had spent 16 months conducting what would become the most thorough investigation of prosecutorial corruption ever undertaken by a member of Congress. Working with FBI whistleblowers, former California prosecutors, and financial forensics experts, she had assembled a case that would expose how the American justice system had been systematically corrupted by one of its most prominent figures. Her team had obtained FBI surveillance recordings, bank records from offshore accounts, case files that had been sealed for national security reasons, and testimony from prosecutors who had been silenced by threats and intimidation. What they had uncovered was a criminal enterprise that operated at the highest levels of California law enforcement for over 2 decades. Across the chamber sat Vice President Kamala Harris, 59 years old and radiating the kind of supreme confidence that comes from believing you've successfully buried your criminal past beneath layers of political achievement and media protection. Her signature purple suit was designer perfect, her pearl necklace gleaming under the chamber lights, and her demeanor suggested a woman who thought she had successfully reinvented herself from corrupt prosecutor to national leader. Harris represented the ultimate American political success story, or so the narrative went. From District Attorney of San Francisco to Attorney General of California to United States Senator to Vice President, she had climbed every rung of the political ladder while building a reputation as a tough-on-crime prosecutor who fought for justice and civil rights. But behind the carefully crafted public image lay a different truth. For over 20 years, Kamala Harris had operated the most sophisticated judicial corruption scheme in American history, selling justice to the highest bidder while destroying the lives of those who couldn't afford to pay for favorable treatment. She had survived scandals, deflected investigations, and silenced critics through a combination of political connections, media manipulation, and outright intimidation. She thought her secrets were buried so deep that they could never be excavated. She was catastrophically wrong. This confrontation was the culmination of one of the most extensive criminal investigations ever conducted outside official law enforcement channels. Lauren Boebert had begun questioning Harris's prosecutorial record 16 months earlier, when inconsistencies in high-profile cases started forming patterns that suggested systematic corruption. Her staff had started by examining public records of cases Harris had prosecuted during her time as San Francisco District Attorney and California Attorney General. They noticed that wealthy defendants with expensive legal teams seemed to receive unusually favorable treatment, while similar cases involving poor defendants resulted in maximum sentences. But the real breakthrough came when a retired FBI agent reached out to Boebert's office with evidence that the Bureau had been building a case against Harris for years, only to have the investigation shut down by political pressure from Washington. This agent, whose identity would remain protected, provided access to surveillance recordings, financial records, and witness testimony that painted a picture of corruption so extensive it would shock even seasoned investigators. What followed was a painstaking process of reconstructing 20 years of criminal activity. Boebert's team had to trace money through complex networks of shell companies, recover encrypted communications that Harris thought had been permanently deleted, and piece together evidence from dozens of sources who had been intimidated into silence. They discovered that Harris had received over $47 million in bribes during her prosecutorial career, hidden through a sophisticated network of offshore accounts, real estate investments, and shell companies. Every major case during her tenure had a price tag, and Harris had collected payment for dismissing charges, reducing sentences, and burying evidence. Most shocking of all, they found evidence that Harris had deliberately prosecuted innocent people when it served her political interests, while allowing actual criminals to walk free in exchange for payment. The California justice system hadn't been corrupted by Kamala Harris. It had been purchased by her. During her time as San Francisco District Attorney and California Attorney General, Kamala Harris had perfected a system for monetizing the justice system that was so sophisticated it operated like a legitimate business. Her office maintained what was essentially a price list for different types of legal outcomes, with rates that varied based on the severity of charges, the defendant's ability to pay, and the political implications of the case. The scheme worked through a network of intermediaries who would approach wealthy defendants or their lawyers with unofficial offers. For the right price, charges could be reduced, evidence could disappear, witnesses could become unavailable, and cases could be dismissed on technical grounds that Harris's office would conveniently discover. The money flowed through a complex web of consulting firms, speaking fees, book deals, and campaign contributions that made the bribes appear legitimate on paper. Harris had learned early in her career that direct cash payments were too risky, so she developed a system that used the legitimate economy to launder corruption money. Her operation was so successful that it attracted clients from across the country. Wealthy criminals would relocate to California specifically to take advantage of Harris's services, knowing that for the right price, they could buy their way out of virtually any legal trouble. The most disturbing aspect of the scheme was how Harris used prosecutions of innocent people to enhance her political reputation while collecting bribes to let actual criminals escape justice. She would deliberately pursue high-profile cases against people she knew were innocent, generating media coverage that portrayed her as a tough prosecutor, while simultaneously taking payments to dismiss cases against wealthy criminals. This created a dual system of justice, where your legal outcome depended entirely on your ability to pay Harris's prices. Poor defendants faced the full weight of a corrupt system designed to generate convictions regardless of guilt, while wealthy criminals could literally purchase their freedom. The federal judicial confirmation hearing had been scheduled to review several of Harris's nominees for federal judgeships, appointments that would have placed her corrupt allies in positions where they could protect her criminal network from future investigations. Harris had agreed to testify in support of her nominees, confident that she could use the platform to demonstrate her commitment to judicial integrity while advancing her political agenda. She had no idea that Lauren Boebert had specifically requested to participate in this hearing because she knew it would provide the perfect forum to expose Harris's crimes in front of a national audience. While Harris prepared her standard talking points about the importance of judicial integrity and equal justice under law, Boebert was preparing to present the most comprehensive case of prosecutorial corruption ever documented in American political history. The chamber was packed with legal experts, civil rights advocates, political reporters, and judicial nominees who expected to witness routine confirmation proceedings. Major news networks had assigned their top legal correspondents to cover what they assumed would be a straightforward hearing about judicial qualifications. None of them were prepared for what they were about to witness: the complete destruction of the second highest office in American government, accomplished through the simple act of playing Kamala Harris's own recorded words back to her. The hearing began with routine questions about judicial philosophy, legal qualifications, and the nominee's commitment to constitutional principles. Harris delivered polished responses that emphasized her dedication to justice, equality, and the rule of law. Her answers were carefully rehearsed and designed to reinforce her public image as a principled prosecutor who had dedicated her career to protecting the innocent and holding criminals accountable. Madam Vice President, Boebert began when her questioning period arrived. Her voice carrying the authority of someone who held explosive evidence. You've built your entire political career on your reputation as a prosecutor who fought for justice. Can you tell us about your personal philosophy regarding prosecutorial ethics and the equal treatment of defendants regardless of their economic status? Harris's response was a masterpiece of political rhetoric, delivered with the confidence of someone who had given similar answers hundreds of times. Congresswoman, throughout my career, I've been guided by the principle that justice must be blind to wealth, status, or political connections. Every defendant deserves equal treatment under the law, and every victim deserves a prosecutor who will fight tirelessly for justice. The answer sounded noble and principled, exactly what the audience expected to hear from the nation's second highest elected official. But Boebert had spent months preparing for this moment, and she knew that behind Harris's carefully crafted public persona lay a criminal record that would destroy everything Harris had built. She reached into her briefcase with calculated precision, retrieving a digital audio recorder and placing it deliberately on the witness table where every camera in the room could capture it. The gesture seemed routine, but experienced political observers immediately sensed that something unprecedented was about to unfold. Madam Vice President, Boebert said, her voice taking on the prosecutorial edge that had made her famous in congressional hearings. I'd like to play some recordings that I think will help illustrate your actual approach to prosecutorial ethics. These recordings were obtained through a federal investigation into corruption in the California justice system. The chamber fell completely silent as Boebert pressed play on the recorder. The audio quality was crystal clear, and within seconds, everyone in the room recognized Kamala Harris's distinctive voice discussing what could only be described as the sale of justice. Harris's voice filled the chamber. The Donovan case is worth at least $2 million to us. His lawyers are desperate, and his family has the money. Tell them we'll reduce the charges from murder 1 to manslaughter. But we need the payment in the Cayman account before the plea hearing. A second voice, later identified as Harris's chief of staff, responded, "What about the evidence? The DNA clearly shows he committed the murder." Harris, "Evidence is only relevant if we choose to present it. For $2 million, we can discover procedural errors that make the DNA inadmissible. The victim's family will never know what really happened." The reaction in the chamber was immediate and explosive. Gasps turned to shouts of outrage as the implications of what they were hearing began to sink in. Harris's face had gone completely white, her hands trembling as she heard her own voice describing the deliberate obstruction of justice in exchange for money. But Boebert wasn't finished with her audio evidence. She had hours of recordings that would systematically destroy every aspect of Harris's public reputation. That recording was from March 2018, Madam Vice President, Boebert announced as the chamber struggled to process what they had just heard. But it wasn't an isolated incident. This next recording is from July 2019, discussing the Rodriguez rape case. Harris's voice again filled the chamber, this time discussing an even more disturbing transaction. The Rodriguez family can pay $1.5 million for a dismissal. The victim is poor, no political connections, no media attention. Will claim insufficient evidence and recommend no charges. Her chief of staff, "Ma'am, we have 3 witnesses, DNA evidence, and a confession. This is a slam-dunk conviction." Harris, "Slam-dunk convictions don't pay the bills. Wealthy defendants do. File the dismissal papers tomorrow and make sure the evidence disappears from the system." The chamber was in chaos now, with senators demanding points of order and reporters frantically typing on their phones. But Harris sat frozen at the witness table, unable to deny her own voice planning the deliberate obstruction of justice in a violent rape case. Boebert continued her systematic destruction. This recording is from September 2020, discussing the Patterson financial fraud case involving $50 million in stolen pension funds. Harris, Patterson's lawyers have offered $5 million for a complete dismissal. That's 10% of what he stole, a reasonable finder's fee for making his problems disappear. Staff member, what about the retirees who lost their life savings? Harris, retirees don't contribute to political campaigns or provide lucrative speaking fees. Patterson does. Dismiss the case and seal the records. But the audio recordings were only part of Boebert's presentation. She had also obtained financial records that showed exactly where the bribery money had gone. Madam Vice President, these recordings aren't just words. They represent actual financial transactions that we've documented through international banking investigations. The chamber screens displayed bank records from the Cayman Islands, showing millions of dollars in deposits to accounts controlled by Harris. This is a wire transfer for $2 million from the Donovan Family Trust, deposited to your Cayman Islands account on March 15, 2018, the same day you dismissed the murder charges we just heard you discuss. Harris tried desperately to respond. These allegations are completely fabricated. Boebert interrupted, advancing to the next financial exhibit. This is a $1.5 million transfer from Rodriguez Industries on July 22, 2019, one day after you dismissed the rape charges against their son. Every recorded conversation has a corresponding financial transaction. Madam Vice President, the financial evidence was overwhelming. Here's $5 million from Patterson Financial on September 18, 2020. Here's $3.2 million from the Morrison family in 2017. Here's $4.7 million from Chun Enterprises in 2019. Every payment corresponds to a case dismissal or evidence suppression that we have documented through court records. She displayed a comprehensive chart showing the scope of the corruption. Over 20 years, you received $47 million in documented bribes, with cases involving murder, rape, financial fraud, drug trafficking, and organized crime. You didn't just bend the justice system, Madam Vice President, you shattered it completely. But the most devastating part of Boebert's presentation focused on the human cost of Harris's corruption. While you were collecting millions in bribes, Madam Vice President, innocent people were suffering the consequences of your deliberate miscarriage of justice. The screen showed photographs and case files of Harris's victims. This is Jennifer Walsh, a single mother who spent 8 years in prison for a murder she didn't commit because you needed a conviction to enhance your political reputation, while the real killer paid you $3 million to escape prosecution. Harris's face was ashen as the human impact of her crimes was displayed for the nation to see. This is Michael Torres, a teenager who was sentenced to life in prison for a drug crime he didn't commit because you were paid $2.5 million by the actual drug dealers to prosecute an innocent scapegoat instead. Boebert's voice rose with righteous fury. This is Sarah Chun, a rape victim whose attacker walked free because his family paid you $1.8 million for a dismissal. She was told there wasn't enough evidence for prosecution, but we have recordings of you admitting the evidence was overwhelming. The personal stories continued. This is Robert Martinez, an elderly man who lost his life savings to financial fraud. The criminals who stole his money paid you $4.2 million to make the case disappear. He died in poverty while you used his stolen money to buy luxury real estate. Boebert had saved some of the most damaging evidence for last. Recordings that showed Harris deliberately destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. This recording is from November 2019, Madam Vice President, where you discuss eliminating evidence in the Williams murder case. Harris's voice. The DNA evidence in the Williams case is problematic. Our client paid $3 million for an acquittal, but the evidence is too strong. We need to make it disappear permanently. Staff member. How do we explain losing critical evidence? Harris. Lab contamination, chain of custody errors, computer glitches. We'll find something. The important thing is that the evidence never sees a courtroom. Williams walks free, and we keep the money. The recording continued with even more disturbing revelations. Contact the lab technician who processed the DNA. Offer him $50,000 to testify that the samples were contaminated. If he refuses, remind him that his son attends Berkeley. It would be unfortunate if his financial aid was suddenly discontinued. The threat to intimidate witnesses sent shockwaves through the chamber. This isn't just corruption, Madam Vice President, Boebert announced. This is witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice on a scale never before documented in American legal history. Boebert then presented evidence of how Harris had systematically fixed cases throughout her career. The corruption wasn't limited to individual cases, Madam Vice President. You operated a comprehensive system for selling justice that functioned like a legitimate business. She displayed organizational charts showing the scope of the operation. You maintained a network of corrupt judges, court clerks, lab technicians, and law enforcement officers who participated in your scheme. Cases were fixed at every level of the system, from evidence collection to jury selection to sentencing. The systematic nature of the corruption was staggering. You had judges who would dismiss cases for payment, lab technicians who would contaminate evidence for money, and police officers who would lose crucial evidence in exchange for bribes. The entire California justice system was corrupted by your criminal enterprise. She played another recording demonstrating the coordination. Judge Morrison is asking for $500,000 to dismiss the Thompson case. Detective Rivera wants $200,000 to lose the murder weapon. Lab technician Phillips needs $100,000 to contaminate the DNA samples. Total cost for a complete dismissal, $800,000. Harris approved. The client can afford it and will still profit $2.2 million. This is why we maintain relationships throughout the system. Justice is a team sport when you're selling it. The investigation had also uncovered how Harris used her political connections to protect her criminal enterprise. You didn't just corrupt the justice system, Madam Vice President. You corrupted the political system to protect your crimes from investigation. Boebert presented evidence of political payoffs. These records show payments to politicians, media figures, and law enforcement officials who helped cover up your corruption. You spent $15 million over 10 years buying protection from investigation. The screen showed a web of corrupt relationships. You paid Governor Newsom's campaign $2 million to ensure state investigations were blocked. You paid Senator Feinstein's husband's company $3 million for federal protection. You even paid journalists $500,000 each to write favorable stories and ignore corruption allegations. The corruption reached the highest levels. When the FBI began investigating your bribery scheme in 2020, you paid $5 million to have the investigation transferred to officials you had already corrupted. The American people were told the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing. But these recordings show you paid for that conclusion. But perhaps most shocking was evidence that Harris had continued her corruption even as vice president. Your criminal activity didn't end when you became vice president, Madam Harris. These recordings show you've been selling pardons and influencing federal prosecutions from the Naval Observatory. A recent recording from 2023 captured Harris discussing presidential pardons. The pardon for the Morrison case will cost $10 million, half up front, half when Biden signs the papers. I'll tell him it's a matter of justice reform, and he'll never question it. The current corruption was active and ongoing. You've sold 12 presidential pardons for a total of $73 million, all while presenting yourself as a champion of criminal justice reform. You're not reforming the system, Madam Vice President. You're profiting from it at the highest level. Harris made one final attempt to deny the evidence. These recordings are clearly fabricated by political enemies. Fabricated. Boebert's voice cut through the desperate denial. Madam Vice President, these recordings were authenticated by FBI forensic specialists. We have voice analysis, metadata verification, and corroborating financial evidence for every transaction. Your own voice condemns you. She looked directly into the cameras for her final statement. Every American needs to understand what we've exposed today. Our vice president is a criminal who has spent 20 years selling justice to the highest bidder, while innocent people suffered in prison and victims were denied justice. The final blow was devastating. Kamala Harris, you violated your oath as a prosecutor, betrayed the public trust, and turned the American justice system into your personal money-making operation. Your corruption ends today. As security moved to restore order in the chaotic chamber, One thing was absolutely clear. Lauren Boebert had just destroyed the Vice President of the United States using Harris's own recorded words admitting to decades of criminal activity. The fearless woman from Colorado had proven that in America, even the second highest office in the land can be held accountable when someone has the courage to expose the truth.